Great. Well, thanks for inviting me back to Chen Ling. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Scot. I've been a student here for about 20 years, especially the main teacher, Geshe Ngawang Dakpa, who's an incredible teacher. Today we're going to talk about the mind, and I heard that Emily Sue has been giving a great class on the same topic in much more detail. This Tibetan Buddhist view, there's a way of looking at the mind, breaking it down into 51 different mental factors, and I believe she's going to touch on them all, if I'm right. So if you get interested in this topic, I bet some of you are already attending the class, but if you get interested in this topic, she's someone who's very well trained in this lineage and teaches with great precision. So I would encourage you to seek out her class or the recordings of the class if they're available later. So today's discussion and meditation goes through a simpler model of the mind. There's many different ones in the Tibetan tradition, and this one is quite different from the Western model of the mind, and it can help you gain an insight into your inner life. Your inner life of thoughts and feelings. The model that you have of your mind influences how you think of yourself and how you think of experience, and even how you think of your autonomy, like whether you have a choice in what you think and do. And so those of you who are familiar with meditation, you may know that it's possible to take on a variety of objects with meditation, and the breath is the one that we know best. And for many people, they've only heard of that type of meditation where you focus on the breath. But it's possible to take on many different types of objects as your point of focus in meditation. And one of my favorites is the one that we're looking at today, is the mind. And so that's a technique where you actually turn the mind upon itself and use the mind to explore the mind. And so there's a little bit of a paradox because this process is a little bit intellectual, and what we see in this tradition is that an intellectual understanding of the mind can lead to an experiential understanding of the mind, that it's a pathway to a direct experience of whatever you are, inside of your mind. So thinking about the mind, reading about the mind, discussing the mind, and then finally meditating on the mind can lead us to greater and greater insights into what the mind is. And I think something quite important is that it's a process that doesn't necessarily require an answer, but continually asking the question over and over again, potentially every day in your meditation practice, can help you gain a greater self-awareness and a deepening sense of who you are underneath all of your thoughts and underneath all the stimulation and entertainment and conflict that we experience every day. And so you may be familiar with some other meditative traditions that take a more experiential approach. And so those are traditions where you might even spend your whole life doing a simple stabilizing practice on your breath, and that's it. And then out of that simple practice, profound realizations eventually emerge. And there's even a famous story of someone who attained enlightenment through just sweeping a monastery floor over and over again. That was their practice. But if you do that completely mindfully and allow your mind to discover itself through a single activity, that can be a valid path as well. Our teacher in this tradition, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, once said that if your parent changing 1,000 diapers might even serve the same meditative purpose if you do it with the right state of mind. Because I think there's a bit of a male bias in this history because it was built for monastics. So it didn't think much about a mother changing 1,000 diapers. Although, fathers today, like myself, do change a few diapers too. I went on a retreat in another Tibetan lineage once, this Karma Kagyu tradition, where it had more of this experiential approach to meditation. And at the beginning of a 1-hour meditation session, they just gave a single 2-word instruction. And what they said was, don't meditate. That was it. And I actually found that quite effective as a meditation instruction because it shocked my mind into a subtler approach that forced me to let go of these concrete ideas that I'm a meditator, that I'm meditating. It made me at first reflect on that, take apart what is my idea of meditating, what is my idea of a meditator, and just let go into a felt experience that was flavored with a lot more openness, curiosity, and surprise, which is, I think, one of the things that happens in meditation, I think we don't talk about that much, is surprise. After you sit there for a while, sometimes you get bored or tired, but there's also moments of real, surprise at the experience that you have. But to get back to this tradition tends to be more firmly grounded in the idea that an intellectual, narrative, highly elaborated understanding of the mind can be equally beneficial to that kind of shock and awe type of meditation. And so those that argue for this intellect first approach make an equally good point when they ask questions like, how can you meditate when you don't know what to meditate on? Right? That's the argument from the more intellectual approach to meditation. I think both are equally valid, but it's interesting to consider both for a minute. So I thought about this a little bit in the context of imagining and remembering what it was like when I was touring a museum. I think we've all had that experience, especially in another city. And we've had that experience of touring a museum with a guide and without a guide. So when you're with a guide, what I recall is that the guide could point out various details and use her deep knowledge of history and interpretation to bring paintings vividly to life, pointing out these little details I didn't even notice, explaining the history, the cultural context. And that type of explanation would literally makes you see the painting differently, with a depth of understanding that brings the period and the subject to life in a way that you see the painting, you never see the same painting again the same way. But at the same time, I think we've also each had the experience where we stumbled upon a work of art that touches you, and you develop a heartfelt relationship to it without even reading the label. A lot of times you don't even want to read the label because it makes that very personal experience that goes beyond words and starts to elaborate it with a lot of intellectualism. And so I thought that was a nice metaphor for these two different types of meditation, one intellectual, one experiential. They're both valid, and that's why very often in a meditation session you do both. You have a non-conceptual stabilizing meditation and then also an analytical meditation. And even though the techniques differ, both of them ultimately are trying to seek this felt experience, an understanding of the topic that transcends words. It's just two different paths. There's another example that they often give in this tradition. It's an analogy that emphasizes the unique power of the felt experience when you have it. They say, a way of saying this is that you might read extensively about chocolate, perhaps even for years, but it's not the same as even a single taste of the chocolate. I think we can all relate to that. Or you might read and reflect on romantic love for many years, but in no way is it the same as your first experience of actually falling in love. So these intellectual gateways to meditative experience are meant only as that. They're a path that takes you through analysis and understanding to some direct felt experience. And for some people, this intellectual approach provides a tool that reliably brings you to a felt experience. I know one of my teachers said, from time to time you do feel quite good, sometimes after a nice meal, sometimes after a movie, or hanging out with friends, or sometimes meditating. But the goal of cultivating a meditative practice is to do that more reliably, to more reliably create the causes for sustained happiness and a sense of well-being. So you can experiment yourself to see, which suits you better at which time. Meditation is something personal, and you adjust your own meditation session so that it fits the way that your mind works best. Another last thing to note before getting more into the topic is that after many times of taking this intellectual or narrative path into an experience, that you are then often able to settle yourself directly into a non-conceptual experience without the narrative preamble that got us there in the first place. Okay, so let's go into the subject then, the subject of the mind. So most of us are probably familiar with some of the Western psychological views of the mind. There's different ways in Western psychology to divide up the mind. One is this division between thoughts and emotions. Another is the division between conscious and unconscious. We've also heard these terms ego, id, and superego, there's 14 approaches. And the Tibetan Buddhist approach has quite a different way of slicing the mind, although there are analogies. And the one that Emily's been teaching and will continue to teach for I think another 10 weeks has these 51 mental factors we mentioned. And today I want to talk about the one that the Buddha first taught in a teaching that was called the 5 aggregates, that takes the normal body and mind duality. So that's another way of thinking about ourselves, that we have two parts, a body and mind, which has kind of gone out of style in the West now. I think there's many people who even doubt the mind, the mind part. But even if you think the mind is a side effect of the body, still you need some way of subdividing its components. And so in this way of looking at it, instead of body and mind, the mind is broken up just into 4 different parts. And so we're going to discuss those today and then later meditate on them. So the first one that can be useful to talk about is translated in different ways. I like the term perception a lot. Sometimes they use the term discrimination, which is, I think, too heavily loaded a word to use for obvious reasons. There's also the term, what was the other term Emily liked to use? Discernment. Yeah, discernment's also, I think, a nice term for it, a preferred term. But I've seen perception used a lot, which I think, for someone who's not familiar with this tradition, it's a word that might immediately bring to mind like the feeling of what this mental factor is. And so perception or discernment means our ability to differentiate objects from one another, whether those objects come through your senses or whether they come through your thoughts and imagination. So for example, our ability to distinguish a rock from an orange, or our ability to distinguish Stephen from Venerable Palmo. When you look at the universe from a scientific perspective, everything that exists is just a continuously varying field of electromagnetic energy. So this isn't saying anything far out or spiritual. This is just from a scientific perspective. And so just from that scientific perspective, there's no color in nature, there's no form, there's no sound, there's no scent, there's no taste, and there's no touch in the universe. All of these are mental phenomena that result from the interaction of our senses with colorless, tasteless, scentless, silent electromagnetic fields, to put the term that we understand them with. And there's great quotes, I'm not going to say them today, but there's wonderful quotes both from Darwin and Newton that both said this in their own language, like very eloquently, 500 or so years ago. It's something you can understand through common sense once you understand the underpinnings of nature, is that perception is a psychological phenomena, as light itself is just differing wavelengths of light. Light has no color. It's just the vibration of electromagnetic energy at different frequencies. And only when it enters our brain do we then elaborate that into color. Like there's no red, there's no orange, there's no yellow, there's no green, there's no blue in the universe. They're purely psychological. And look at all the colors in this room, right? All of those only exist in our mind. They're colorless in the world as we understand it from the scientific perspective. And some of you are aware there's a famous sutra called the Heart Sutra that talks about this very beautifully, but it requires no spiritual context to understand something that's just true from a scientific perspective, and just as wonderful and amazing. So that's perception, is that the ability of your mind to take some sense phenomena or mental phenomena and then divide them up and say, okay, that bit of vibration is Stephen, and that bit of vibration is Palmo. And my mind is going to make a strong division between you two. Even though in the universe you're actually kind of vibrating against each other and exchanging bits of yourself with each other. You know, so in some ways it seemed kind of gross. You're each breathing each other in right now. You know, your skin is flaking off. But also just the energy, the sound energy and the light energy, and even the little bit of like electromagnetism. And it's not far out or spacey or new age or anything. It's just true from a scientific perspective. And so a next factor we can discuss is feeling. And this one is usually confusing because it doesn't map to emotion the way that we typically understand it. So people say this a lot because it's kind of surprising that there's no clear mapping of this Western term emotion to Tibetan, because from this Buddhist perspective, all mental phenomena are seen as having both a thought and a feeling component, that you couldn't have a feeling without some thought that it's responding to. And so also they say the words heart and mind are also conflated in the Buddhist psychological model, like the word for those two things. There's a single word that means both of those things at once. And so in this model, emotions don't exist without being tied to some form of reasoning. And so feeling in this case is much more simply defined. And many of you, there's some very experienced students here, so you know this. So you can just treat this as your meditation. But feeling in this case is more simply defined as the apparent pleasantness or unpleasantness of an experience that typically leads us to want to repeat the pleasant experiences and to avoid the unpleasant ones. And then there's also a point in the middle called neutral. That's a third level of feeling that's neither pleasant or unpleasant. And so from this psychological view, everything that pops into our ordinary mind, whether it comes to our senses or our imagination or reasoning, has an accompanying feeling, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so in emotional terms, we feel happy, unhappy, or indifferent. And I like this model because it seems more fundamental than the more complex Western emotions like anger and jealousy and so on. And also those Western emotions, other cultures don't experience and name them in the same way. Like another kind of famous example is this feeling of self-loathing, which is a foreign concept to Tibetans when they first encountered Western psychology, even though to us it felt quite natural. So to us, I think it can feel quite universal and commonsensical to say that for every mental experience, we either like it, or we don't like it, or we feel indifferent to it. So can anybody think of another response besides liking, not liking, and indifferent? Okay, so those are two. So we have perception, we have feeling, and then a third component of the mind. It also has different translations. One way it can be translated is intention, and another is volition. And this is the component of the mind that compels us to action. And so sometimes I also like to think of this using the term will. Actually, like being willful or having free will. But there's no free on top of it. I think that's kind of up for grabs. that's for another discussion later. So it's the part of your mind that drives you to act, that gets you off the couch, that compels you to actions that might be in your best interest, the ones that produce happiness, or that compels you to actions that run counter to happiness, that get us into trouble. And when you break it down, like if you take Emily's class, this component of the mind actually can be elaborated as a grab bag of many different states of mind, both tamed and unruly, that drive us to action. But quite often it's summarized under this term volition, that like the strongest factor is that drive to action, the drive to actually do something or take action. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical action, but it can be a mental action, like a resolve or a strong wish. So that's the third aspect of the mind. And again, from this Tibetan Buddhist perspective, these are considered kind of constantly operating elements of your mind that you can actually come to know and discern and tame. And so the last factor that we can talk about is consciousness or awareness. And that the consciousness is like the stage of the mind, the kind of place where our thoughts and our feelings and all the other mental phenomena arise. And at least sometimes, most of us are able to step back and notice our thoughts and feelings. So raise your hand if you've ever noticed your thoughts and feelings. I think probably everybody in this room, right? But there are many people who don't, actually, and I actually want to talk about that sometime too. So then who is it or what is it that observes those feelings? And again, from one perspective, finding a clear answer to this question isn't important, and it might not even be possible. Or maybe there's a momentary answer, that there's an answer in the moment for you, but it's one that's always changing. But simply asking the question is a powerful way to meditate. And there's some structured ways of exploring the nature of mind by pointing the mind back at itself like this. And so we'll do these shortly in a meditation, but I want to explain the techniques first. So one way of looking at your awareness is to notice that there's a temporal aspect to the mind. So we can all see how the mind changes from moment to moment, and how different thoughts, feelings, and perceptions seem to arise from somewhere and then take center stage in our mind and then diminish. And so as you look closely at your consciousness in this way, it might seem possible that you can divide these moments of consciousness into smaller and smaller moments of consciousness. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers calculus class. That might have been a hard class for people. But it was quite profound for me when I finally got to calculus. I was always good at math, but I was a little bit bored with it until I got to calculus. And calculus I found quite profound, because it shows you this boundary between the discrete, like things that happen, instant by instant, and the continuous, where like there's no break between things. And in the beginning, or when you're studying calculus, you prove this thing called an integral. An integral is a thing that can kind of add up the area under a curve. And you prove it by this proof where you keep slicing thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. Like you make thinner and thinner little rectangles under the curve and add them up. And then if you shrink those rectangles down eventually to infinitely small, then it's like snaps and it becomes a different type of math that is Leibniz invented, the calculus. And so it's exactly the same process, actually, in this meditation, where you try to slice and dice the moments of consciousness, and every moment you see like there's a boundary against the past and there's a boundary against the future. So it has two sides, so there must be a middle. So then let's slice it in the middle, but then that slice has a little bit that touches the past and a little bit that touches the future. And you keep doing that, and I think similarly to, depending, I don't know if you flunked out of calculus or not, but eventually I think something you can start to see is that there's a moment where you break through in the meditation as well. and you realize that maybe those boundaries have no meaning, that if you can slice them forever, like where did that past moment go? Where did the future moment come from? Where's the next one coming from? You may get to the point that you feel like there's nothing but the present moment. And, that's what that, strangely, the process of reflecting on just the boundary of the past and the future can break you through to not realizing that those two don't exist at all, and all there is a present moment. So actually, to make this more concrete, you don't have to study calculus to do this. My daughter actually said to me, it was 2 nights ago, she actually said to me, kind of as a joke, she said, we were asking what our favorite time of the day is, and I asked my daughter, and she said, my favorite time of the day is now. She's 8 years old. And so I really loved that, and I think that's is a very good answer. So what is the present moment? Does the present moment ever end? So you can see what we just described are just different ways of asking this question, and you could come up with 100 more on your own, and your friends and family can give you ideas too. And none of what we've said is meant to say that our consciousness is actually the way that we're describing it, or the way that we're looking for it. But each of these techniques gives us a way of reasoning about our consciousness that might suddenly land us in this non-conceptual awareness of what consciousness itself is, awareness of awareness. And if you ever find yourself in that state, you just try to relax, like let go, just let go. Wherever you were in the meditation, at the end or the beginning, like you forget about it, because the intellectual part is just a tool. So however you get to that part, maybe even just thinking about what your kid said that night, whatever gets you to that spot, if you find yourself there, just abandon all of the intellectual part and rest in that experience. And then eventually it does degrade, and then you can use some intellectual process to build it back up again. So that's just about the temporal aspect of the mind. Then there also can appear to be a spatial aspect of the mind. And so as you picture someone or something, or even an idea, similarly it appears to manifest in some kind of mental space. And the technique here is to let go of the object and look at the space itself, like the space where the object arises. And so look at the space of your mind open-mindedly and think, does this space have a size? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Is it light? Is it bright? Is it dark? Is it deep? Is it shallow? Does it remain the same, or does it change? And if you let yourself become aware of that space, then it can be interesting to let objects then appear in the mind while you stay aware of the spatial or the temporal aspects of the mind, and then notice how your awareness interacts with objects. So on the spatial level, sometimes objects can seem to appear like a reflection, and not necessarily a two-dimensional reflection, but kind of a three-dimensional reflection. Like the mind is almost like a holographic mirror that like reconstitutes the objects that appear to it. Or on the temporal level, if you look at the mind, you can notice the appearance, then the rising strength, and then the diminishing thoughts and perceptions. And so then there's also moments when the mind empties, and either when the mind empties or just in the gaps between thoughts and feelings and perceptions. And that is a very nice place to examine too, is rest in the moments between thoughts, feelings, perceptions, those gaps, or moments of clarity without an object. When you can get to know the subtler aspect of yourself, like what is the mind without thoughts? And that's a little bit subtler aspect of yourself that's usually buried under stimulation, worries, and so on. And then also in that state, you can also probe the feeling component that might be associated with like the reflection of an object, and the kind of there can be a kind of taste, like an emotional taste, associated with that state that is kind of like a special sort of happiness, one that's not afraid of losing things, and that's also not striving for more, but that's just content and joyful at just the experience of being alive and aware. And if you ever go on a retreat, you can get into the state where you realize that you don't really need anything to be happy. In fact, you sort of need fewer things, less stimulation, less interaction, and just time to go inward. And so that's the intellectual description of the experience. And now we can go into the meditation. So I think we can just go straight into it, right? And then we'll have a break afterwards. That's okay. Okay. So wherever you are situated is fine, whether you're in a seat or on a cushion. If you're in a seat, having your legs straight out and down, like not crossed, can be good. Or you can cross your legs on your seat as if it were a cushion. Like that can work too. The Dalai Lama does that a lot. If you're on a cushion, having your legs cross-legged posture in some way. If you're extra flexible, half lotus or full lotus. I don't see people meditating in full lotus that much. But any kind of cross-legged posture. What's important, though, on the floor is to elevate your spine by sitting on some kind of cushion that is a few inches thick. And then placing your hands on your knees, or one hand atop the other in your lap. If your hands are together in your lap, often they say your right hand on top of the left and your thumbs touching. Leave a little space between your arms to let air circulate, which prevents you from getting too hot, which is probably not a problem today. And then try and adjust your spine. That's the most important aspect of the posture, is to get a straight spine, whatever that means for you. It's going to be something different for every person, but you can just tilt your spine forward and back until it feels like your spine is aligned. You could feel not just comfortable, but alert. That it's a posture that supports focus. And then you can tilt your head down slightly so that it might hit a spot on the ground, maybe 4 feet in front of you. And then your eyes you can half close or almost all the way close. Let a little light in. But adjust that however you like. If that makes you sleepy, open your eyes. And if you're distracted, you can close your eyes. And then try and relax all the muscles in your shoulders, your face, your eyes, your brow, your neck. Just tell all those parts of your body to relax. And you can slightly open your mouth and touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth. And then very briefly just establish a motivation to honestly and curiously explore our minds, to understand better who we are beneath all those thoughts, and to find a state of contentment and peace in the present moment for our own lasting happiness, and also for the happiness of everyone we encounter. And it's nice to reflect on our natural goodness here, that good qualities lie at our heart and at our very nature, that we can see these qualities in others, and that they can be strengthened and even perfected in ourselves just by letting go of the disturbing mental habits, letting the natural clarity and warmth of our mind shine through. So just for a short minute, bring your attention to your breath, to attach your mind to your body. Try to put all your focus on your breath coming in and out of your nostrils, or with the rise and fall of your abdomen. Just for 60 seconds to help stabilize the mind. And now we turn the mind upon itself. So just let whatever arises in your mind arise naturally. But as it does, focus on the aspect of perception or discernment. So notice how your mind is able to differentiate sounds, the traffic outside or the ticking clock, my voice. How it takes something that is continuously varying and it's like it wraps it in a little package, puts a mental label on top of it so that it seems separate, clearly identified. And it's the same thing with feelings in your body. You might feel some pain or discomfort or ease or warm or cold. So focus on that perception aspect. How something without a label gets that label attached. How our mind divides phenomena from each other. Or as thoughts arise, how we compartmentalize them. How the continuous experience of thought gets broken into discrete parts. And we can say that is a memory, that's a plan, that's a feeling, that's a worry. So just try that yourself. Just for 30 seconds, quietly. Look at the perception aspect of your mind, discernment. now in the same way, without trying to control what arises in your mind, look at the feeling component of your mind. Just notice whatever arises in your mind, how it gets colored with liking, whatever it's perceived, or disliking, feeling discomfort or unpleasantness, or just a neutrality and indifference. Like with a sound, maybe the ticking clock, you might feel completely indifferent to something just in the background, or you might feel annoyed, like a negative feeling, or you might feel like it gives a rhythm to your thoughts, reminds you of something pleasant, so you have a pleasant feeling associated with that sound. Same thing with your body. The pain is, any pain in your body you likely don't want to repeat. Or if you feel warm and comfortable, that's something you like, that's pleasant. If this experience of meditating that you may be labeling, you're enjoying, then you might have a pleasant feeling associated. Or if it's difficult, you might feel unpleasant. So again, just for 30 seconds on your own, let anything arise in your mind naturally, but pay attention to the feeling that's associated with any perception, any sound, any thought, any body sensation. And now let's look at that next mental factor of volition. So notice how some of the thoughts and feelings that occur in your mind are stronger, drive us to action. Like our plans for lunch could be quite strong, or the snack we're going to enjoy. I'm definitely going to grab one of those scones. But see how part of your mind doesn't just experience thoughts and perceptions, but actually creates an intention to act. So for 30 seconds, again, just let whatever arises in your mind arise. And notice how there's a component of volition. It can be quite subtle with many of the mental phenomena, and then very clear with others. But there's a component of it wrapped up with every moment of consciousness. And then the last thing we look at is the stage of the mind. The fourth factor is consciousness or awareness. And so try to let the thoughts and feelings and perceptions become a little distant, and the space in which they appear to take center stage. And let's just examine it with some curiosity, open-mindedness. Does this space have any color to it? Or any brightness? Is it dark or is it bright? Is it pure white or does it have a hue? Pure darkness? Does the space stay the same or does it change? And does the space of our mind have a size? Is it contained within our skull? Is it contained within our whole body? Or does it bleed out? Does it encompass parts of this room? Does it even overlap with others? Does it expand even further? And does that stay the same or does it change? Look at how objects appear within the mind. It's as if whatever it is, whatever texture and color, shape that mind has, it gets sculpted into the form of what you're perceiving through your eyes or ears or your imagination and memory. And then notice the temporal aspect of the mind more closely. How you can take snapshots that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The mind is a series of moments of consciousness that keep coming one after the other. But a moment has a beginning, a part that touches the past, and an end, a part that touches the future, and then some middle. And so if it has a duration, it can be sliced in half. And so keep doing that. And as you do, you find the paradox that every moment can be sliced forever. And yet also there's no real past. It's gone. There's no real future. It's not here yet. And so by chasing this paradox, you can arrive at the incredible, mysterious phenomenon of the present. And so for a moment, try also to let go of any thoughts and feelings, perceptions. In that present moment, the nature of your mind without thoughts has a clarity to it, and it has a knowing aspect, a deeper way of knowing. And then you can gently steer yourself back to the grosser aspects of awareness, but with a motivation to try to stay aware of the subtler aspect of your consciousness, even as it gets elaborated through discussion and through eating a snack, through more thinking and planning. If you can remain aware of the awareness underlying the grosser aspects of experience, then you can cultivate an underlying joy and a deeper sense of presence in everything that you experience and do. And so we dedicate any good that we've accomplished through meditating together like this to staying mindful, self-aware, in touch with this deeper aspect of our awareness, our consciousness, our mind, the subtler part of ourself. And then as you feel comfortable, you can come out of the meditation. Okay, so I think we have some homemade snacks, and then we can sit and have a little discussion after that.